The world of the Northmen was carved from ice, sea, and ambition. For centuries their dragon-prowed longships struck terror across Europe, their arrival marked by smoke and chaos. They were Vikings, explorers, traders, and conquerors, sailing to North America, trading in Constantinople, and founding kingdoms in England and France. Their gods were fierce, their sagas legendary, and their age was one of fury and discovery. But the winds were shifting, the world was changing, and so were the Vikings. The raider became a farmer, the pagan a Christian, the wanderer a king. Europe was uniting, building walls and armies, making the old ways obsolete. The lone wolf, the freelance warrior, was fading into history. Imagine standing on a northern cliff, the sea once a highway to adventure, now a barrier to a shrinking world. Stories from the south spoke of powerful kings, steel-clad knights, and a single jealous god. The age of Odin and Thor was ending, replaced by new laws and new faiths. The Viking flame, once bright and violent, was flickering out. Change gathered like storm clouds over Scandinavia. The era of the sea-born warrior was entering its twilight. The end of the Vikings was not simple defeat, but a dramatic transformation, the final chapter of their saga. For centuries, Norse life revolved around gods like Odin and Thor, deities of war, wisdom, and thunder, perfectly suited to a harsh world. But from the south came a new faith, Christianity, the religion of the White Christ, promising forgiveness and peace instead of vengeance and glory. At first, Vikings wore Thor's hammer and the cross together, but Christianity demanded exclusivity. Conversion was slow and often violent, driven by kings seeking power and legitimacy in Europe. Rulers like Olaf Tryggvason and Canute the Great used Christianity to unify their realms and access the church's administrative power. The old gods faded as Christianity took hold, ending practices central to Viking identity, slave trading, blood feuds, and the pursuit of a warrior's death. The church condemned the old ways, replacing them with new laws and justice. The Norse gods retreated into folklore, their power broken. The spiritual landscape of the North was forever changed. Early Viking raids were quick strikes for gold, silver, and slaves, hit and run, then home. But as raids grew, Vikings began to settle, overwintering in camps that became permanent communities. The predator became a settler, then a ruler. In England, the Danelaw emerged, a blend of Norse and Anglo-Saxon culture still visible in place names today. In France, Rollo was granted Normandy, where Vikings became French-speaking Christian Normans. The Viking settler had new priorities: land, crops, and community. Their loyalty shifted from distant chieftains to their new homes. The descendants of raiders became dukes and earls, building kingdoms instead of burning them. The Viking spirit of adventure survived but now fueled state-building, not piracy. The transformation from raider to ruler reshaped Europe. The age of the lone Viking was over. The age of the kingdom had begun. The Northmen's legacy was now one of creation, not just destruction. Viking success owed as much to Europe's weakness as to their own strength. Fragmented kingdoms and local defenses made easy targets for swift raids. But constant attacks forced Europe to adapt. Kings like Alfred the Great built fortified towns, reorganized armies, and created navies to meet Vikings at sea. Across Europe, stone castles replaced wooden forts, and the feudal system took root. Knights, professional, armored warriors emerged, changing the face of warfare. The Viking shield wall was no match for disciplined cavalry and fortified strongholds. Raiding became riskier, easy plunder vanished. European kingdoms hardened, building networks of defense and professional armies. To succeed, a Viking needed to be a king, commanding nations, not just ships. The era of small raids ended. Only great royal expeditions remained. The world was no longer open to the freelance Viking. The future belonged to organized states and powerful monarchs. The Viking Age was closing as Europe built higher walls. By the 11th century, Viking power rested with ambitious kings, not raiding bands. Harald Hardrada of Norway, the Hard Ruler, was the last and greatest of these monarchs. Exiled as a youth, he became a mercenary, fighting across Europe and rising to command the Byzantine emperor's Varangian Guard. Returning to Norway with immense wealth, he seized the throne and sought to rebuild a North Sea empire. Hardrada's ambition was boundless. He waged war against Denmark and set his sights on England. In 1066, with England's throne in dispute, he launched a massive invasion, no mere raid but a bid for kingship. 300 ships carried his army, the last great Viking force. This was the final act of Viking power, a last attempt to conquer England. Hardrada embodied the old Viking spirit: warrior, adventurer, king. The stage was set for a decisive confrontation. The Viking Age was about to meet its end on the battlefield. In late summer 1066, Hardrada's fleet crossed the North Sea, joined by Tostig Godwinson, and quickly seized York. King Harald Godwinson, expecting invasion from Normandy, raced north with his army in a legendary forced march. At Stamford Bridge, the Vikings were caught off guard, many without armor. The English attack was swift and brutal. The sagas tell of a lone axeman holding the bridge before falling. Once crossed, the battle became a slaughter. Hardrada fought like a berserker but was killed by an arrow. Tostig fell beside him. The Norwegian army collapsed. Of 300 ships, only a handful returned to Norway. The defeat was total, the last great Viking army destroyed. The dream of a Scandinavian England died in the mud of Yorkshire. Stamford Bridge marked the end of Viking invasions. The age of the Viking warrior was over. Stamford Bridge is seen as the symbolic end of the Viking Age, a catastrophic defeat that broke Norway's power. The era of grand invasions was over. Scandinavia turned inward, focusing on its own lands. Days later, Harald Godwinson faced William of Normandy at Hastings, and fell. Ironically, William was a descendant of Vikings. The age ended with conquest by Viking blood. England became a centralized feudal state, no longer a target for northern raids. Old ties between England and Scandinavia were severed. The Viking world was isolated, surrounded by powerful kingdoms. Scandinavia adopted European models of kingship, law, and church. The fury of the Northmen faded, replaced by assimilation and change. The Viking had been tamed, not by defeat but by transformation. With raiding over, Scandinavia transformed from a land of chieftains to unified kingdoms. Monarchs, backed by the church and aristocracy, centralized power and law. The church spread literacy, art, and new culture, while Norse sagas were finally written down. Trade replaced plunder. Scandinavian merchants joined the Hanseatic League. Cities flourished. The longship gave way to the cargo ship, and society became part of European Christendom. Stone castles and cathedrals rose. Kings ruled by divine right. The Viking spirit endured, but in new forms: seafaring, trade, and culture. The age of the Viking ended. The age of the Scandinavian kingdoms began. The Viking legacy endures, in language, law, and blood. They were not just destroyers, but creators and connectors, linking worlds from Canada to Central Asia. Cities like Dublin and regions like Normandy bear their mark. Old Norse words fill English speech. Their legal traditions shaped modern justice. DNA reveals their genetic legacy across Europe. The Vikings' greatest gift is their story, a saga of courage, adaptation, and change. The longships are gone, but the echoes of the axe still shape who we are.